There's a moment in the morning, before anything else has started, when your dog finds you. Maybe they hear you sit up before the alarm, and they're already at the bedroom door, waiting. Maybe they come padding across the kitchen floor while the coffee's still running, and they press their weight against your leg. Just resting there for a second, not asking for anything, and you reach down without thinking about it and scratch behind their ears, and the whole morning goes quiet. Not dramatically, just the ordinary, daily quiet that still counts for something every single time it happens. I've had that moment every morning for about 11 years, with different dogs. The mornings change, the dogs change over time, but that moment doesn't. And if you're here, I think you know exactly what I mean. You built it, whether you meant to or not. The routine, the response, the specific way your dog knows it's you before you're fully in the room. And inside that moment, for most dog owners, there is a question that has never once been answered. Who takes your dog if something happens to you? Not when you're ready, not someday in some soft and distant future, not when you've had time to sort through all of it. Who takes your dog tonight? If something happens tonight, if you're in a car accident, if you're in a hospital by the weekend, if you're gone in a way none of us want to say out loud, I know what most of you just thought. My sister would take her. My best friend loves him. My neighbor, she'd be there. Those are names. They are not plans. And there is a difference between a name in your head and a plan that actually works for your dog. And the gap between those two things is where dogs get lost. Most of what you'll find if you go looking for answers on this topic lives in legal forums and estate planning websites, pet trusts, probate codes, guardian designations. Most people read a few paragraphs, feel vaguely overwhelmed, and close the tab. I did it more than once. This is what I wish someone had walked me through instead. Not just the legal mechanics, though I'm going to get to those. The actual shape of the plan. What it requires of you, what it protects your dog from, and why the hardest piece of it is not the paperwork. I have something to tell you near the end of this video that I don't think most people realize is even part of the plan. It's the thing that made it feel real to me, not just responsible. Stay with me for it. Here's the thing about dogs and contingency planning. Almost every dog owner, when you ask them directly, has some version of an answer. It comes quickly, a name, a relationship, a vague confidence that if the worst happened, the right person would step up. I want to be honest about what that usually means, because I think it's worth naming clearly. It means there is a person in your life who loves your dog, and you believe, without having asked them, without having talked through the details, without anything written down anywhere, that if something happened to you, that person would figure it out, and your dog would be okay. I'm not here to tell you that's never true. Sometimes it works exactly that way. The sister steps in. The neighbor shows up. The friend comes through without being asked, but it sometimes works is not the same as it will work for your dog. And the reason the gap exists, the reason so many loving, devoted dog owners have no real plan, isn't carelessness. You're watching a 20-minute video about this right now. Carelessness is not what's happening here. The gap exists because the assumption is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the back of your thinking, doing the work of a plan without any of the work a plan actually requires. The ASPCA's documentation on owner-related surrender situations and the AKC's resources on responsible ownership and estate planning both describe the same picture. Every year, dogs end up in shelters or in difficult transitional situations, not because their owners stopped loving them, but because something happened to the owner and there was no plan. A family scrambled. Disagreements happened. The person who meant to step in found out under pressure that they couldn't. And the dog, who had lived in a specific house with a specific person who knew all their specific things, ended up somewhere that didn't know any of them. A few years ago, a woman I knew through the neighborhood had a medical emergency. Not a death, a hospitalization that lasted 4 weeks. She had a 7-year-old shepherd mix who everyone in the family knew and loved. There was no designated person. There was no file. Nothing was written down anywhere. In the first 48 hours, 2 different family members took the dog to 2 different locations, each convinced they were the obvious choice. It took weeks to sort out, The dog ended up in a boarding facility for nearly 3 weeks, while the people who loved her figured out what should have been figured out long before any of this happened. The dog was fine, in the end. Good people worked it out. But those 3 weeks in an unfamiliar kennel happened because a plan that should have existed didn't, and everyone involved loved that dog. That's not a rare tragedy. It's a predictable outcome from a common gap. Understanding how it fails makes the fix obvious, and the fix is not as large as it feels from where you're standing. Here is something most dog owners don't know, and I think it's worth knowing clearly before we talk about what to do. Your dog legally is property, not in the way you think of your dog. In the way you think of your couch, under United States law, animals are classified as personal property, which means that when a person dies without a specific legal arrangement for their pet, the animal becomes part of the estate, subject to the same distribution process as a savings account, a piece of furniture, a car. Depending on the state and the circumstances, this process takes weeks, sometimes months. During that time, your dog is somewhere waiting, in a shelter, with a family member who may not have been asked, in a boarding situation with no map for what your dog actually needs, not designed to know your dog sleeps on the left side of the bed, not designed to know the pill has to be hidden in a specific kind of treat because they've figured out every other method, not designed to understand that a stranger's house without a familiar smell is the most disorienting thing that could happen to your dog in the worst week they've ever had. I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this to make it sound hopeless. I'm telling you this because the same legal system that classifies your dog as property also built a specific solution to this problem. It sounds overwhelming, but the specific legal fix for this already exists. It's called a pet trust. A pet trust is a legally enforceable document, not a note, not a verbal agreement, not a letter, that designates a caretaker for your animal and can set aside funds for their ongoing care. It has legal standing. A court can hold the trustee to its terms. There are other instruments as well. A guardian designation inside a will. A durable power of attorney that explicitly includes your pets. A care letter that, at minimum, puts your intentions on record. Which one is right for your situation depends on your state, your dog's specific needs, and what you're trying to protect against. I am not an attorney, and nothing in this video is legal advice. What I'm giving you here is the map. For the actual document, whichever one fits, a 30-minute conversation with an estate attorney who handles pet planning is absolutely worth your time. Many of them do this routinely. For most people's situations, it does not need to be complicated or expensive. What matters right now is understanding the shape of the problem. And before any document can do anything for your dog, there is one thing you need to figure out first. It's where most informal plans collapse before they even start. I want to walk you through 3 specific ways the informal plan fails, not to make this harder than it is, but because seeing exactly where it breaks down is what makes the actual plan feel simple by comparison. I've watched all 3 happen to people I know. I made all 3 mistakes myself. The first is logistics. The person who loves your dog most may live in a no-pets apartment building, 2 states away. They may travel for work 6 months out of every year. They may have a dog of their own who does not get along with other dogs. They may be 70 years old, in fragile health themselves. Love without logistics is a feeling. It is not a plan. And in a crisis, a feeling does not do anything for your dog. The second is knowledge. Your dog takes a pill every morning, half a tablet, hidden in a specific kind of treat, because they've learned to find it in everything else. They have a thunder routine that takes 40 minutes to work through correctly. They have a history with one eye that every vet needs to hear about before anything else happens. A person who loves your dog but doesn't know your dog, the operational version, the medical history, the fears and the triggers, is starting from scratch at the worst possible time. And a dog who has just lost the person they were bonded to is not going to be in a position to help anyone learn on the fly. The third is clarity. Nobody asked. Nobody said yes. Nobody's name is written anywhere. The people in your life who love your dog have each separately assumed that someone else has this covered, because nobody wants to be the one to start a conversation that requires saying out loud what might happen. I had a name in my head. I had never spoken it to that person. Meanwhile, I have a Chihuahua named Noodle who has a heart murmur, a nighttime routine that has to happen in a specific order, and a deep, principled objection to everything delivered by the postal service. And none of it was written down anywhere. That is not love. That is hope dressed up as a plan. And hope is not something your dog can use. Here is the plan. The actual concrete version, the foundation of it is naming a guardian, specifically in writing, after a real conversation. A guardian is one primary person, and ideally one backup, who has actually heard the question, understood what it involves, and said yes out loud. Not a person you believe would say yes, not a name in your head. A person who has said yes in a conversation you have actually had with them. When you're figuring out who that person is, I want you to run through the logistics before you run through the love. Not because logistics matter more than love, because your dog needs both. And only logistics are visible before you ask the question, can this person handle the ongoing cost of your dog's care, including any medical needs? Do they have space? Time? If they have other animals, are those animals a compatible fit with your dog? Can they get to your dog within 24 hours if something happened tonight? Not eventually, tonight. And realistically, are they younger than you? In a way that means they're likely to still be there when your dog might actually need this. You are still looking for someone who loves your dog. You are only also checking whether they can actually do this. Once you have that person, you have to make them legally visible. That means a legal backup for most people. A reasonable starting point is either a simple pet trust or a guardian designation inside an existing will, a document with legal standing that names your designated caretaker, states your intentions, and specifies any provision you're making for your dog's care. I want to say this once more, clearly. Verbal agreements are not enough. Good intentions are not enough. Your love for your dog is not legally visible unless it is written in a form that can be enforced. The document is not a formality. The document is the protection. Which instrument is right for you is a conversation worth having with an estate attorney in your state. Not because it's complicated, but because close enough on a legal document matters less than you might hope. But legal protection doesn't tell them how to care for your dog. That's where the care document comes in. I call it the file. The format is up to you. A note on your phone, a printed page in an envelope somewhere findable, a shared document. The format is not the thing. What is in it is the thing, your dog's name, date of birth, breed and approximate weight, your vet's name, the clinic name, the phone number, any specialist contacts, current medications, their dosages, their schedule and the specific method your dog will actually tolerate for taking them, known health conditions and their history, known fears, known triggers, dietary specifics if they're relevant, and the behavioral things a caregiver actually needs to know, the operational things, not just the charming ones. What happens during a thunderstorm? Whether your dog resource guards farv or toys, whether they've ever bitten anyone, in what circumstances, and what the history around that looks like. Noodle's file is a page and a half. I've updated it 3 times in 2 years as things have changed. At the very top of it, there is a line that says, read this before you do anything else. I would rather update that file 15 more times and never need it than have my brother trying to piece together who she is during the hardest week of his life. That is not a close call. And the final piece to all of this, the one most people skip, is the conversation. Not because it's logistically complicated, because it requires you to say out loud to someone you care about that something might happen to you, and to ask them out loud whether they will be there for your dog if it does. Most people who love you will say yes without hesitating, but they need to actually say it, and they need to know what they're agreeing to, where the file is, where the document is, what your dog is like, what the first week would actually look like on the ground. This is not a 10-minute conversation. Done honestly, it is a real hour. Not tagged onto the end of a phone call, but a dedicated block of time with space to go through everything. I had this conversation with my brother on a Sunday afternoon 2 winters ago. He made a joke to cut the tension. That is what he does, always. And then he got quiet and said he understood. I sent him the file that night. I told him exactly where everything was. That conversation was uncomfortable for maybe 10 minutes. And then it was done. And I have not spent a single night since then wondering what would happen to Noodle if something happened to me. There is one last piece to this, and I think it's the part that actually matters and the easiest one to miss when you're thinking about logistics. The hardest part of this plan is not the document. It's not even the conversation. Though the conversation takes something out of you, the hardest part is accepting that loving your dog, really loving them, the way you've loved them every morning for years, sometimes means making yourself think about what happens when you're not there. Not because something bad is imminent, not to spend more time in anxiety about your own mortality than you already do, but because your dog is entirely dependent on you. They cannot make a plan. They cannot reach out to someone when something goes wrong. They cannot explain to a stranger what they need, or what they're afraid of, or why they're standing at the door, waiting for a person who isn't going to come back. On a Wednesday evening at 9:15 a few years ago, I was sitting on the couch with Noodle curled against my leg, and I had what I can only describe as a very clear thought, not an anxious one, just true. If something happened to me right now, she would not understand what was happening. She would just wait. That thought didn't ruin the evening. It clarified something. The love that happens every morning, when she finds me before anything else has started, it isn't only in the reaching down and the scratching behind the ears. It isn't only in the food and the walk and the time on the couch. It's in the file. It's in the document. It's in the conversation I had with my brother on that Sunday afternoon where I said, here is who she is, here is what she needs, and here is where everything is if you ever need it. That is not an errand. That is love made specific, in a form that actually works for her when I cannot be there. If you've been putting this off because it felt too large or too sad to look at directly, the task is smaller than the feeling of it. One person, one conversation, one file, one document when you're ready. You don't need a lawyer tonight, but you can start the easiest piece tonight. If you want a place to begin that isn't overwhelming, start with the file, your dog's name, your vet's number, current medications, a first draft in 20 minutes. Everything else builds from there. The gap between having this plan and not having it is not enormous. But for your dog, if they ever need it, it is the whole world. Leave it in the comments if something like this has happened to you. If you went through this without a plan and know exactly what it cost, or if you finally sat down and made the plan and you want to tell someone that you did. I read everyone, and honestly, these are the stories I keep the longest. See you out there.